"That one," Rowan Hayes said and pointed. Not at Savannah. Not at the woman in the silk dress who'd practiced her smile for a week. Not at any of the daughters Red Hollow had polished and presented like county fair ribbons. He pointed at Elena. Dirty boots. Split knuckles. A broken hardware box tucked under one arm. The crowd didn't gasp. It went completely silent, the kind of silence that means everyone is thinking the same thing, and nobody will say it first. Her father's face went white. Savannah stopped breathing. And Elena Brooks, the forgotten one, the invisible one, the sister. Nobody ever chose, looked the richest man in Texas dead in the eye and did not look away. Before we go any further, if stories like this move you, please subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that bell so you never miss a single episode. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The morning Rowan Hayes was expected in Red Hollow. Elena Brooks was already awake before the sun. Not because she was excited, not because she cared about the richest man in Texas riding into their dying little town. She was awake because the north fence had split again overnight, and if she didn't get to it before the cattle pushed through, they'd lose 3 head before breakfast, and her father would find something new to blame her for. She pulled on her boots in the dark, listening to the sound of her sister Savannah sleeping peacefully one room over, the soft, unbothered breathing of someone who had never once been asked to haul water or patch wire before dawn. Elena didn't resent Savannah for sleeping. She'd stopped resenting Savannah for most things a long time ago. What good did it do? The world had divided them at birth into 2 different categories of daughter, and no amount of anger was going to rearrange what their father had already decided. Savannah was the beautiful one. Savannah was the one being saved. Elena was just the one keeping everything from collapsing long enough for the saving to happen. She stepped out into the cold Texas morning and got to work. By the time the sun was properly up, she'd fixed the fence, moved the water barrel from the east side of the barn, found the leak in the roof of the storage shed, and eaten half a biscuit standing over the kitchen sink because there wasn't time to sit down. Her father came in while she was rinsing her hands. Gerald Brooks was not a mean man when he was sober. Elena had held on to that fact her entire childhood like a life raft. But he hadn't been sober before noon in going on 4 years, and the man who stood in the kitchen doorway with his hair uncombed and his shirt half-buttoned was not the father she was holding the life raft for anymore. "Is Savannah up?" he said. Not "good morning," not "thank you for the fence." "Not yet," Elena said. "Wake her. I need her dressed and presentable by 10. He rubbed his jaw, and even from across the room Elena could smell the bourbon from the night before still on him. "Rowan Hayes is coming through town today. The whole county's going to be there." "I know." "This is important, Elena." He said her name the way he always did, like it was an afterthought. "This family needs this match. Savannah needs to make an impression." Elena dried her hands on the dishcloth and turned around. "What about the Caldwell payment? It's due end of the month, and we're still 400 short." Gerald waved his hand. "That's what this is for. Rowan Hayes has more money than God. If Savannah plays this right, our problems are finished. And if she doesn't..." He looked at her the way he always looked at her when she asked a practical question, like she'd said something offensive. "She will. She's beautiful. Men like Rowan Hayes respond to beautiful." Elena didn't say anything else. There was nothing to say. She'd learned years ago that conversations like this one didn't have a destination she was invited to. She went to wake Savannah. Savannah Brooks at 21 was everything their small town had decided a woman was supposed to be. Dark hair that curled without effort, skin that somehow stayed smooth through drought and wind, eyes that knew how to say things her mouth never had to. She was also, Elena knew from 24 years of living beside her, terrified. "I don't want to do this," Savannah said the moment Elena opened the bedroom door. She was already sitting up, knees pulled to her chest, looking younger than 21. "I don't even know this man." "Nobody does," Elena said. "Get dressed. Papa's already wound up." "What if I hate him? What if you do?" Elena handed her the dress their aunt had sent from San Antonio, pressed expensive borrowed. You don't have to love him to marry him. People do it all the time. Savannah stared at her. Would you do it if it was you? Elena paused at the door. It's not me, she said quietly. So it doesn't matter. She left before Savannah could see whatever was moving across her face. The town of Red Hollow had a talent for performing prosperity. It didn't actually have. And the morning Rowan Hayes was expected was its finest performance in years. Storefronts that hadn't been painted since before the drought suddenly had fresh flowers in the windows. The women who ran the church auxiliary had organized something that looked almost like a reception. A long table outside the feed store. Lemonade and sweet tea and baked goods, placed with the careful casualness of people who wanted to seem like they did this every day. Everyone knew what the day was really about. Everyone knew a man like Rowan Hayes didn't pass through a town like Red Hollow unless he was looking for something specific. And the rumor which had been burning through the county for 2 weeks was that he was looking for a wife. Not a society wife. Not a woman from one of the old Texas families with pedigree and connections. Something different. Something he hadn't been able to find anywhere else. Elena heard this from Martha Greer at the general store, who had heard it from the hardware man, who had allegedly heard it from one of Hayes's own ranch hands. She didn't know what to make of it. She didn't particularly try. She had a list of things to do before evening, and thinking about Rowan Hayes wasn't on it. She was at the hardware store when his wagon came through. She wasn't looking. She was trying to negotiate a discount on a box of fence staples she couldn't entirely afford, and the hardware man old Pete Callum was explaining for the 3rd time why he couldn't go lower than the price on the tag, and Elena was doing the math in her head on what she could actually defer to next month when the whole street went quiet. Not slowly, all at once. The kind of quiet that falls when something happens that everyone feels before they understand it. She turned. Rowan Hayes was not what she expected, though she'd be hard-pressed to say what she'd expected. He wasn't the largest man in the group that came with him. He wasn't the most decorated. He dressed plainly good clothes, but plain, and he rode without any of the showmanship she'd imagined attached to a man of his reputation. What she noticed was how he looked at the town. Not like he owned it, not with arrogance. He looked at everything around him with a kind of careful measuring steadiness, the way a man looks at a situation he's trying to understand before he commits to any position in it. People moved toward him immediately. The whole crowd flowed in his direction, the way water flows downhill, instinctive and unavoidable. Elena turned back to Pete Callum. I'll take half the box, she said. I can come back for the rest. Pete wasn't paying attention to her anymore. He was craning his neck toward the street. Elena put exact change on the counter, picked up her half box of fence staples, and headed for the door. She didn't mean to end up near him. She was just moving through the crowd toward where she'd tied her horse, and the crowd had thickened faster than she'd calculated, and suddenly there was no clear path, and people were pressing together, and she was stuck closer to the center of things than she'd wanted to be. That was when she saw Savannah. Savannah was standing with their father about 20 feet away, close enough to the front of the crowd to be visible far enough back to seem like she wasn't trying too hard. Gerald had her by the elbow, his fingers white with the grip of it, and Savannah was smiling the smile she used when she was frightened. Elena knew that smile. She'd seen it her whole life. She started moving toward them, not sure what she planned to do, when she got there just operating on the instinct that her sister looked like someone who needed a hand nearby. And then the crowd shifted, and she lost her footing on a loose board and grabbed the nearest post to steady herself. And the fence staples went sideways in her arms, and she grabbed for them and caught most of them and straightened up, and when she looked up, Rowan Hayes was 6 feet away and looking directly at her. Not at Savannah. Not at the assembled daughters of Red Hollow's finest families. At Elena. Mud on her boots. Wire calluses on her hands. Staples half spilling out of a busted hardware box. She stared back at him. He didn't look away. "You're working," he said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an accusation. It was just an observation stated plainly like the weather. "Fences don't fix themselves," she said. It came out before she'd decided to say it. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, an acknowledgement. His eyes dropped briefly to her hands, the calluses, the dried blood at the edge of one knuckle from this morning's wirework, and then back to her face. "What's your name?" he asked. Behind him, she could see people watching. She could see her father's face going through about 4 different colors. She could see Savannah very still reading the situation. "Elena Brooks," she said. "Gerald Brooks's daughter." "The other one," she said, because that was how she'd been introduced her entire life, and the habit of it came out before she could choose a different answer. Rowan Hayes' eyes changed at that. Something shifted behind them, something she couldn't name, something that looked almost like recognition. "The other one," he repeated quietly. Her father was moving toward them now, smile already plastered on hand, already extended for the greeting he'd been rehearsing since the rumor started. "Mr. Hayes?" Gerald stepped in between them like a man stepping between a wall and the most important thing that had ever nearly crashed into it. "Gerald Brooks, we are honored to have you in Red Hollow. I'd like to introduce my daughter, Savannah." "In a moment," Rowan said. Gerald stopped. The words died in his mouth. "You didn't say in a moment to Gerald Brooks and stay standing, not in Red Hollow, not among his people." But Gerald Brooks did nothing, because this was Rowan Hayes. Rowan looked back at Elena, and she had the strange, disorienting sensation of being the only 2 people in a crowd of 50. "Do you work the ranch yourself?" he asked. "I do," she said. "All of it and most of it." "Why?" She looked at him steadily. "Because it needs to be worked." Silence. Around them, 50 people were holding their breath without knowing they were doing it. "Are you spoken for?" he asked. Her father made a sound, a strangled, involuntary sound. "No," Elena said. Rowan Hayes looked at her for another 3 seconds. Then he turned to Gerald. "I'd like to speak with your daughter," he said. Gerald's smile cracked back into position. "Of course, Savannah is right." "Elena," Rowan said. "Okay." What happened next would be talked about in Red Hollow for 20 years. Rowan Hayes requested a private conversation with Elena Brooks. Not Savannah. Not the beautiful one, the prepared one, the one whose dress had been borrowed from San Antonio and ironed 3 times. The other one. The one with the mud on her boots and the hardware store box, Elena's father argued. He smiled while he argued the practiced, deferential smile of a man trying to manage something that was already past managing, but he argued. He mentioned Savannah twice. He mentioned the family's long history in the county once. He made the case as gracefully as a half-drunk man in the presence of someone he needed could make it. Rowan heard him out without interrupting. Then he said quietly, "I appreciate that. All the same, it's Elena I'd like to speak with." Gerald looked at his older daughter like she'd done something to him. Like this was her fault somehow. Like she'd arranged this to humiliate him. Elena kept her face still. She was good at that. "5 minutes," she said to Rowan Hayes. "I have things to get back to." Something that might have been respect moved across his face. "5 minutes," he agreed. They stood apart from the crowd near the side of the feed store, and Elena was aware of every eye in Red Hollow trying to look like it wasn't looking at them. "You want to tell me what this is actually about?" she said. "I'm looking for a wife," he said. "I gathered. Not a decorative one." She looked at him. "I'm not sure how to take that." "As a compliment," he said. "I've met enough decorative women. They're exhausted, most of them. Spending every day being looked at is its own kind of hard work." A pause. "But it's not the work I need." "What work do you need?" "Someone who can stand in the middle of something falling apart and not run," he said. "Someone who knows what it is to hold a thing together through sheer willpower when every reasonable option says let go." His eyes held hers. "I run a large operation, Miss Brooks. It's complicated. It has enemies. It has problems I'm not entirely finished inheriting. I need someone beside me who understands difficulty, not someone who's been protected from it." Elena was quiet for a moment. "You don't know me," she said. "I know what I saw," he said. "The rest, I'm willing to learn. And if what you learn is wrong, that's a risk I'm willing to take." She looked away toward where her father was standing with Savannah watching. Savannah's face was unreadable. Gerald's face was everything she'd expected. "You'd be taking me away from something that needs me," she said. "I'd be offering you something that needs you too," he said. "Something significantly bigger." She looked back at him. "What makes you think I want bigger?" "You're standing here having this conversation instead of walking away," he said. "That tells me something." She couldn't argue with that. The next hour was the hardest Elena had navigated in recent memory, and she had navigated some genuinely hard hours. Her father pulled her aside the moment Rowan stepped away to speak with the town's sheriff, an old acquaintance. "What did he say to you?" Gerald gripped her arm above the elbow. "Not enough to bruise, enough to mean it." "What were you two talking about?" "He wants to speak with me further," Elena said. "At the ranch." "His ranch." "That would follow." "Elena." His voice dropped into the register it used when he was trying to be careful through the layer of drink. "You are not what he needs. This man runs an empire. He needs a woman who can present herself properly, who can what?" She said, keeping her voice even. "Who can smile right, who knows which fork to use." "Is that what you think an empire runs on?" "Don't get smart with me." "He asked for me, Papa, not Savannah. Me." She held his gaze. "You can be angry about that, or you can let me find out what it means. But I am 24 years old, and you do not get to make this choice for me." She had never said anything quite like that to him before. Not directly, not standing still looking him in the eye. He stared at her for a long moment. Something in him went through several different phases. Anger, then something more complicated, then something that in another man, in another moment, might have looked like recognition. Then he let go of her arm and walked away. Savannah found her 10 minutes later. "Elena!" Her sister was still in the borrowed dress, but she'd stopped performing it. "Tell me the truth. Are you going to go with him?" Elena looked at her. "I don't know yet." "He didn't even look at me," Savannah said. It wasn't accusation. It was something quieter and more honest confusion, and under that something that might have been relief, though Savannah probably wasn't ready to name it. "I know," Elena said. "Why you?" Savannah said. "I'm not being cruel, I'm asking honestly. Why you're not—" She stopped. "I'm not what—" Savannah pressed her lips together. "You're not what men like him usually want." "Apparently I am," Elena said. "Exactly what men like him want." Savannah looked at her for a long moment. "Are you scared?" Elena thought about it honestly. "Yes," she said. "But I'm also 24, and I've been fixing this family's fences since I was 17, and nothing has ever changed, and nothing was ever going to change." She paused. "And he said something to me that nobody's ever said to me before." "What?" "He said I have a choice." Savannah went quiet. "Nobody's ever said that to me," Elena said. "Not once. Not in this house, not in this town." She looked at her sister steadily. "I don't know if Rowan Hayes is a good man. I don't know what I'm walking into, but I know what I'm walking away from. And Savannah, I am so tired of it." Her sister didn't say anything for a while. Then very quietly, "Don't let him hurt you." "I'll do my best," Elena said. When she found Rowan Hayes again, he was standing by his horse with two of his men speaking in low tones that stopped when she approached. "I'll go with you," she said. "Not because I'm sold on this, because I want to see what you're actually offering before I decide anything." He looked at her. "Fair. I have conditions. Tell me." "I won't be decorative," she said. "Not for you, not for anyone at that ranch. If I'm there, I'm working. Real work." Agreed. If I decide this isn't right after I've seen it, I walk away without argument. He studied her for a moment. Agreed. And you don't ever go to my father about my decisions. You come to me. Whatever happens between you and me is between you and me. He lost the right to negotiate my future a long time ago. Something changed in Rowan Hayes's face at that. A shift too subtle to name, but she felt it. Agreed, he said. And then, you don't trust easily. I haven't been given a lot of reasons to. He nodded slowly. That's fair, he said. And for what it's worth, neither have I. She went back to the family house that evening to pack what she needed. It wasn't much. She'd never had much. She took her good boots, her work clothes, the small tin box where she kept what little money she'd saved, and a photograph from the windowsill, not of her family, of the property. The ranch in better years before the drought and the debt, and her father's particular way of handling both. She stood in the kitchen for a long moment before she left. Gerald was in the back room. She could hear him in there, not moving, just sitting. She didn't go in to say goodbye. She thought about it. She stood at the door for 10 seconds. Then she picked up her bag and walked out. She didn't look back. She had learned in 24 years of that house that looking back cost more than going forward. She rode out of Red Hollow in the long gold light of late afternoon, beside a man she barely knew, toward something she couldn't see clearly yet. Behind her, the town talked. It would keep talking for years. But Elena Brooks wasn't there to hear it anymore. She had finally, after everything, chosen herself. And somewhere in the part of her that had been silent and patient and exhausted for so long, something opened like a window in a room that had been closed too long, and the air that came through it was clean. She didn't know yet what was waiting for her at Hayes Ridge. She didn't know about the secrets buried in the foundation of everything Rowan had built his life on. She didn't know what was coming, but for the first time in 24 years, she was moving towards something instead of just holding something up. And just that, felt like the most revolutionary thing she had ever done. Hayes Ridge Ranch was not what she'd built in her imagination during the ride out. She hadn't built much. Elena was not a woman who spent a lot of energy on imagination when reality had always demanded so much of her attention. But she'd assembled some version of it from what people said about Rowan Hayes, vast, cold, fortress-like. The kind of place that reflected its owner. What she found was something older than that. Something that had been grand once, and was working hard to still be grand, and you could feel the effort in it, the way you feel effort in a person who is holding themselves very straight when everything in them wants to sit down. The hands who met them at the entrance were quiet and watchful. They looked at Elena the way people look at something unexpected, not hostile, not welcoming, just reading, trying to figure out what she meant. One of them, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s with a scar along his jawline, and the kind of eyes that had seen considerable trouble and filed it away without drama, stepped forward as they dismounted. "Miss Brooks," Rowan said, "this is Cal Denton. He runs the day operation here. Anything you need to know about how this ranch functions, Cal's the person." Cal Denton looked at her hands, just briefly. Then he nodded once with the kind of respect that working people give other working people when they recognize something in each other. "Ma'am," he said. "Cal," she said. "What broke today?" He blinked. "Something always breaks," she said. "What was it?" Cal looked at Rowan. Rowan said nothing. Just waited. "North water pump," Cal said, turning back to her. "Third time this month. We've patched it twice, but the housing's cracked clean through and we need to replace it, not patch it. Cost, more than we've got allocated for maintenance this quarter. What happens if you don't fix it this week? We lose pressure to the east pasture. Cattle start drifting. I'll look at it tomorrow morning," Elena said. "I want to see what we're working with before anyone spends money on something we might be able to fix another way." Cal looked at her for a moment. Then something at the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Behind her, she heard Rowan Hayes exhale. She couldn't tell what it meant. The house inside was large and quiet, in the particular way of places where there hasn't been enough people for the space in a long time. It wasn't dirty. It wasn't uncared for. It was just empty of something that houses need when they're built the size this one was built. A woman named Dorothy ran the household. She was 60-something, efficient, suspicious of strangers, and absolutely committed to not showing it. She gave Elena a tour of the relevant parts of the house with the brisk energy of someone completing a task, and Elena followed and listened and asked 3 questions that made Dorothy slow down slightly each time and reconsider. "You know how a ranch house actually runs?" Dorothy said finally. It came out like an accusation. "I ran one," Elena said. "Not as big, but the same problems." Dorothy looked at her for a long moment. "The last woman who came to look at this place," she said, "asked me if we had someone to do her laundry." "I do my own laundry," Elena said. Dorothy nodded slowly. "Dinner's at 6, she said. "Mr. Hayes eats at the table. He expects company for it." "I'll be there," Elena said. Nick, dinner with Rowan Hayes was not comfortable, and it was not supposed to be. They were 2 people sitting across from each other who did not yet know what the other was, and were both smart enough not to pretend otherwise. He asked her questions. Practical ones at first about the ranch she'd grown up on, about the specific problems they'd faced with the drought, about what solutions she'd tried, and which had worked and which hadn't. He listened with total attention, the kind of listening that doesn't perform itself, that doesn't nod at the right moments to seem engaged. He just went still and took in what she said. "You knew the Caldwell note was coming due," he said at one point. "I've known for 8 months," she said. "My father knew for 6. He decided the solution was Savannah." "And you didn't agree?" "I agreed that we needed a solution," she said. "I didn't agree that selling my sister was one." She met his eyes. "For what it's worth, I don't think you were the villain in that plan. I think my father was." "Savannah would have been miserable," Rowan said. "Savannah would have survived," Elena said. "She's stronger than people give her credit for when they stop treating her like a prize." A pause. "She's just never been given a reason to use it." Rowan was quiet for a moment. "Is that what happened to you? You were given reasons?" "I was given no choice," she said. "That's different from reasons." He looked at her. "Is it?" "Yes," she said. "Reasons can be wrong. Having no choice just makes you, whatever you end up being." He poured more coffee without asking if she wanted it. She did so. She didn't object. "I want to be straightforward with you," he said, setting the pot down. "This ranch has problems, not just operational ones. There are things I've inherited from my father that I'm still working through. If you stay, you'll find them. I'd rather you hear some of it from me than stumble into it." Elena set down her cup. "Tell me." "Not tonight," he said. "Tonight, you need to sleep, but soon." "Don't wait too long," she said. "I don't like being the last one to know things that affect me." "Understood," he said. "Rowan." She used his first name deliberately, watching to see if it registered. It did. Something in his face sharpened slightly. "I'm not afraid of hard things. I came from hard things. But I need to know what I'm dealing with." "You will," he said. "I give you my word." She decided to believe him. Not because she was certain he deserved it, but because she'd made the choice to come here, and a choice you make halfway isn't really a choice at all. She was up before 5 the next morning. Cal Denton found her at the north pump 20 minutes after she got there. He stopped when he saw she'd already pulled the housing apart and had the cracked section in her hands, turning it under the early light. "You weren't kidding," he said. "I never kid about pump housings," she said. "Who cast this? It's thinner than it should be. This was always going to crack." "Hayes Sr. ordered it from a supplier out of Lubbock," Cal said. "Cut costs where he could on the infrastructure, spent the money on cattle instead." "Which worked until it didn't," she said. "You've got the same supplier. Same contract. Cancel it," she said. Cal went still. "Mr. Hayes runs the contracts." "Then I'll ask him to cancel it." she said. "But don't order from them again. This is the third failure in a month from this equipment. Whatever you're saving on the front end, you're losing in repair time and cattle drift." She stood up. "I can weld a temporary housing that'll hold for 60 days while we find a better supplier. You have a shop on the property." "We do." "Show me." Cal stood there for a moment, looking at her the way people look at something that doesn't fit the category they put it in. "Ma'am," he said finally, "where exactly did you come from?" "Red Hollow," she said. "That's not what I meant." She almost smiled. "I know," she said. "Show me the shop, Cal." The ranch hands started watching her differently by the end of the first week. Not warmly, necessarily. She hadn't earned warm yet, and she wasn't trying to rush it. But they watched her the way working people watch someone who shows up where they're not expected and does the work without making a performance of it, with a kind of cautious assessing attention that was the beginning of something. She fixed the pump housing. She found a rotten section in the feed barn floor before one of the hands walked through it. She sat down with the ranch's account ledgers on the third evening and spent 4 hours going through them with the focused silence of someone reading a story they already suspect is going to end badly. It was going to end badly. Not immediately, but the margins were thinner than they looked from the outside, and there were expenses that didn't add up, and payments going somewhere that wasn't labeled clearly, and she flagged 4 of them and brought them to Rowan the next morning. He looked at them. He was quiet for a long time. "You found these in one night," he said. 4 hours, she said. "I wasn't trying to find anything. I was just reading." "These payments," he said carefully, "they go to a man named Gideon Cross. He's a lawyer out of Houston. He handles certain long-standing obligations of my father's." "What kind of obligations?" He looked up at her. This was the moment she'd been waiting for since dinner on the first night, the moment where whatever he'd said he was going to tell her either materialized or didn't. "Sit down," he said. She sat. "My father," Rowan said slowly, "was not an honest man. He built a great deal of what you're looking at through means that wouldn't survive public examination." He paused. "Gideon Cross knows where the bodies are buried, metaphorically speaking. He's been paid for his silence for 15 years. "Blackmail," Elena said. "Ongoing arrangement," Rowan said, "which amounts to the same thing." "How much does he have on the family?" "Enough." He leaned back. "Bribed judges. Stolen water rights from smaller ranchers who didn't have the resources to fight back. Land purchases that weren't entirely voluntary on the seller's part." Elena was quiet for a moment. "And you inherited all of this?" "Along with the cattle empire, yes." "Did you know when you took it over?" He looked at her directly. "Some of it," he said. "Not the extent." A pause. "I've been trying to untangle it, quietly, without destroying everything in the process." "How long have you been trying?" 3 years. "Is it working?" "Slowly," he said. "And there are people who don't want it to work. People who would rather see the Hayes name destroyed publicly than see me fix it quietly." He held her eyes. "One of them is a man named Caleb Mercer. He owns the ranch adjacent to ours on the eastern boundary. His family lost land to my father 20 years ago. He's been building a legal case ever since." "Is the case valid?" "Yes," Rowan said, without hesitation. Elena absorbed that. "So what's your plan?" "I'm working on one," he said. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." She looked at the ledger in front of her, at the 4 flagged payments, at the number that represented 15 years of keeping a dead man's secrets. Then she looked at Rowan Hayes, at the weight of it on him, at the way a man carries something like this, not dramatically, not loudly, but with the steady, tireless burden of someone who has made the choice to bear what could have crushed them. "Stop paying Cross," she said. Rowan stared at her. If you stop paying him, you take back control of when and how this comes out," she said. "Right now he decides. Every month you send that payment, you're handing him the wheel." She pushed the ledger toward him. You can't fix what your father did while you're still paying to hide it. Those two things are going in opposite directions. Silence in the room. You understand that if this becomes public, everything here could collapse, he said. I understand, she said. I also understand that things built on what your father built don't last anyway. The crack shows eventually. Better to choose when. He stared at her for a long time. You've been here 8 days, he said. I know. And you're telling me to blow up a 15-year arrangement. I'm telling you to stop funding someone else's power over you, she said. What you do about the underlying problem is a different conversation. But that conversation has to start with you being in control of it. He stood up. He moved to the window and stood there with his back to her, and she let him think. She was good at that, at the kind of patience that doesn't push, that just holds space for someone to find their own way to the thing they already know. You're not wrong, he said finally to the window. I know, she said. He turned around. Something in his face had changed, not softened exactly. Clarified. Like a man who's been arguing with himself for a long time and has finally decided which side he's on. I need to think about how to do this, he said. Take the time you need, she said, but not too much of it. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that they were already out of time. Caleb Mercer had not been building his legal case in isolation. He had allies. He had connections in the county courthouse and friends in the regional newspaper, and a network of families who had been wronged by the Hayes Empire over 20 years and had never forgotten it. And 3 days after Elena's conversation with Rowan about Gideon Cross, Caleb Mercer walked into the office of the Red Hollow Courier and handed the editor a document. The document was a copy of a deed transfer from 1903. It showed a parcel of land that was currently part of Hayes Ridge, 80 acres of prime grazing land along the Eastern Creek, changing hands under circumstances that included the signature of a judge who had been on the Hayes payroll for a decade. The editor ran the story, and by the time the paper reached the ranch, it had already reached everyone else. Cal brought the paper to Elena first, not to Rowan. She understood why after she read it. Cal had worked this ranch for 22 years. He knew what this story meant for the men who depended on it for their livelihoods, for their families, for everything they'd built their adult lives around. He brought it to her because in 8 days she had become, without anyone deciding it, the person on this property who people brought hard things to. She read it twice. Then she found Rowan. He was in the stable. She knew because that was where he went when he needed to think without being looked at. She'd noticed that already, the specific route he took when something was pressing on him. You've seen it, she said. He didn't turn around. Mercer moved faster than I expected. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. Rowan. She stepped closer. Your men are going to ask you that question within the hour. You need an answer before then. Not a full plan, just a direction. People can survive uncertainty if they believe someone knows which way forward is. He turned. His face was controlled in the way of a man who has trained himself out of showing the things that move through him, but she was learning his face, learning the slight shifts that the control couldn't entirely flatten. I should have dealt with this before now, he said. Yes, she said, but you didn't, and here we are. That's not... He stopped, almost smiled without warmth. You're remarkably unsentimental. I grew up without the luxury of sentiment, she said. Talk to your men, today, before they hear more from the newspaper than they heard from you. And say what? The truth, she said, as much of it as you can. She held his eyes. They've worked for you for years. They deserve better than silence. Something moved across his face, something old and complicated and tired. My father would have handled this very differently, he said. I know, Elena said. That's exactly why I'm asking you to do it the other way. He looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had been in his house for 8 days and had already reached through every wall he'd spent years constructing, not with force, not with calculation, but with the simple, relentless gravity of someone who tells the truth and expects it in return. Gather the men, he said. She nodded. I'll get Cal. She turned to go. Elena. She stopped. I don't... He paused. I'm not accustomed to this. To what? To someone telling me what needs to be done and being right about it. She looked at him for a moment. Get used to it, she said, and walked out. She didn't hear what he said to his men that afternoon. She wasn't invited, and she didn't try to be. That was his moment, his responsibility. And there are things a person has to do alone, even when they have someone beside them. But she heard from Dorothy, who heard from the foreman's wife, that Rowan Hayes stood in front of 30 ranch hands and told them the truth about what his father had done and what he'd been trying to untangle, and what the newspaper story meant, and what he planned to do about it. He didn't make excuses, Dorothy said, and there was something in her voice that sounded like surprise, and underneath the surprise, something that sounded like relief. Good, Elena said. He mentioned you, Dorothy added, watching her. Elena looked up from the account ledger she was still working through. What did he say? Dorothy was quiet for a moment. He said he'd been given good counsel, she said carefully, and that he intended to follow it. Elena went back to the ledger, but her hand turning the page was not entirely steady. Something was happening in her. Something she didn't have the vocabulary for yet. Something that was equal parts terrifying and solid, like the first boards of a floor you're not sure can hold your weight, but you step onto anyway because there's nowhere else to stand. She turned the page. She kept working. Outside across the yard, Rowan Hayes was talking to his men, and somewhere in the county, Caleb Mercer was reading the morning paper and waiting to see what the Hayes family would do next. He had no idea what was coming. Neither did Elena entirely. But she was no longer the woman who stood still and held things up while everything fell around her. She was something else now, something she was still becoming, still figuring out the edges of. And whatever it was not going to be invisible. Not anymore. Caleb Mercer did not wait for a response. That was what Elena learned about him in the 48 hours after the newspaper story ran. He was not a man who gave space for the other side to gather itself. He'd spent 20 years building toward this moment, and now that it had arrived, he intended to move through it like water through a cracked dam. Fast and in every direction at once. The first thing that happened was the cattle. Cal came to Elena before dawn on the third day after the story, and the look on his face told her everything before he opened his mouth. How many? She said. 230 head, he said. East pasture, gone overnight. Stolen or scattered. Scattered would have left tracks going different directions. These tracks go one way. He paused. East. East was Mercer land. Elena was already moving. Get Rowan. He's already at the pasture. Then get me a horse. Jeg. Rowan was standing at the fence line when she arrived, and she could see from 30 yards away that he was working hard to stay controlled. 2 of his best men were with him, and they were all looking at the same thing, a clean cut in the fence wire, precise and deliberate, the kind of cut that takes planning and tools and a specific intention. This wasn't random, she said. No, Rowan said. Mercer. Has to be, or someone working for him. Can you prove it? He looked at her. Not yet. Then don't say it publicly, she said. Not until you can. She walked the fence line reading it. How long would it take to round up scattered cattle from his property? If they're on his land legally, we can't just go get them, one of the hands said. We'd need a court order, Rowan finished. His voice was flat. Which goes to Judge Harlan's court. And Harlan has been looking for a reason to put a ruling against the Hayes family for 15 years. Elena turned around. Is Harlan one of the judges your father bribed? A beat of silence. Yes, Rowan said. Then Mercer picked his moment carefully, she said. He waits until the story breaks, until your credibility is already damaged. Then he takes cattle and forces you into a courtroom where the judge already hates you. She looked at him steadily. He's not coming for the cattle, Rowan. The cattle are just the opening move. He's coming for the ranch. The 2 ranch hands looked at each other. One of them, Young, maybe 22, with the kind of face that hasn't yet learned to hide what it feels went pale. Rowan said nothing for a moment. Then, "What do you recommend?" "Don't go to Harlan's court," she said. "File in the district court instead. It'll take longer, but you won't be walking into a room where the outcome is already decided." She paused. "And in the meantime, go see Mercer yourself." "Excuse me, not with lawyers, not with threats." She held his gaze. "Go see him, man to man. Tell him you know what your father did to his family was wrong, and you want to talk about making it right." Rowan stared at her like she'd suggested something in a foreign language. "He's not going to—" "Maybe not," she said. "But if you go and he refuses, that tells you something about whether this is really about justice or just about destruction. And if he listens even for 5 minutes, you've started something different than a war." "Men like Mercer don't sit down for tea," one of the hands muttered. "I'm not asking him to," Elena said, not unkindly. "I'm asking him to sit down as a human being with another human being who's willing to admit something wrong was done." She turned back to Rowan. "Your father never did that. That's the one thing Mercer never got. An admission." She let that land. "It doesn't fix everything, but it changes everything." Rowan looked at her for a long time. The morning wind moved between them. "You are the most unusual woman I have ever met," he said. "I'll take that," she said. "Are you going—" Another pause. Then, "Not alone." "Good," she said. "I'm coming with you." They rode to the Mercer property that afternoon, just the two of them. No ranch hands, no lawyers, no weapons beyond what any person carries for basic safety on open land. Caleb Mercer met them on the porch. He was a lean, weathered man in his mid-50s with the kind of face that had been handsome once and was now just hard. Not cruel, but packed tight with years of grievance and patience and the specific exhaustion of someone who has been waiting a very long time for something they were owed. He looked at Rowan. He looked at Elena. His eyes stayed on Elena slightly longer, with a kind of puzzlement that wasn't hostile. "Hayes," he said. "Mercer," Rowan said. "Thank you for seeing us." "I haven't asked you to sit yet," Mercer said. "No," Rowan said. "You haven't." Silence. A long one. The kind that has history in it. "Who's she?" Mercer said, nodding toward Elena. "Elena Brooks," she said before Rowan could answer for her. "I'm Rowan's—" She paused for just a fraction of a second. "I'm part of the ranch." Mercer's eyes moved over her, the work clothes, the directness, the complete absence of the social performance most women used in situations like this. "Brooks," he said. "Gerald Brooks's girl?" "The other one," she said. Something flickered in his face. "Gerald Brooks is an idiot," he said with the calm certainty of long acquaintance. "We agree on that," she said. Mercer almost smiled. He didn't, but it was close. He looked back at Rowan. "Say what you came to say." Rowan took one breath. Then he said it plainly, without softening, without the legal hedging Elena had half expected him to use. "My father stole from your family. The land transfer in 1903 was fraudulent. He bribed the judge. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he did it anyway, because he could." A pause. "I can't give you back 20 years. I can't undo what he built on what he took. But I am telling you, standing here, that what he did was wrong. And I want to talk about what right looks like from here." Mercer was very still. Elena watched him. Watched the thing that moved across his face. Not softness, nothing that simple. Something more complicated. The particular shift that happens in a person when they've been waiting so long to hear a specific thing said out loud that the actual saying of it is almost too much to process at once. "Your father," Mercer said very slowly, "told my father that if he tried to fight the transfer, he'd make sure the whole county knew things about our family that would make us unwelcome anywhere in Texas." He paused. "There was nothing to know. He was bluffing. But my father was 63 years old, and he had grandchildren, and he didn't have the fight left in him." Another pause. "He died 2 years later. I always believed—" He stopped. That the stress of it killed him, Elena said quietly. Mercer looked at her. Yes. Nobody spoke for a moment. I'm not asking you to stop the legal case, Rowan said. If you believe the courts are where this needs to go, I won't fight that. What I'm asking is whether there's a version of this where the 80 acres comes back to your family and your cattle come back to mine, and we figure out the rest of it without destroying everything that innocent people have built on both sides. Mercer looked at him for a very long time. You're serious, Mercer said. I am. Your father would rather have burned the ranch down than said any of this. I'm not my father, Rowan said. Another silence. I need to think, Mercer said finally. And I need to speak with my brother. This isn't a decision I make alone. I understand, Rowan said. You'll have my answer in 3 days, Mercer said. The cattle are in my east pen. I'll have my men return them tomorrow, regardless of what I decide. He said it simply, like a man who had made his point and didn't need the advantage anymore now that he'd been heard. Rowan nodded. Thank you. They were halfway down the porch steps when Mercer spoke again. Brooks, he said. Elena turned. Was it your idea, Mercer said, coming here like this? She didn't hesitate. Yes. He nodded slowly. Gerald Brooks's other daughter, he said almost to himself. Somebody finally got that right. They rode back in silence for the first 20 minutes. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but is very full, and Elena let it stay that way because there are moments when talking takes something away. It was Rowan who spoke first. He's going to say yes, he said. I think so, she said. But don't count on it until he does. If he says yes, we still have to deal with Gideon Cross. One thing at a time. He was quiet for another stretch. Then, my father would call what I just did today the most foolish thing a Hayes has ever done. Your father's legacy is currently in a regional newspaper, Elena said. So his opinion on strategy has some limitations. Rowan made a sound. It took her a second to recognize it as a laugh, real unexpected, caught off guard by itself. She'd never heard him laugh before. It changed his face entirely, younger, looser, something underneath the weight of everything surfacing briefly. He caught himself quickly, but she'd seen it, and she filed it away in the part of her that was quietly, carefully, without quite having decided to beginning to keep track of Rowan Hayes. They were 3 days from Mercer's answer when the second blow landed. It came from inside. A man named Foster Webb had worked the Hayes accounting for 11 years. He was meticulous, trusted, and had keys to the financial records that predated Rowan's ownership by a decade. He had also, Elena discovered, at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night while cross-referencing payment records against the original ledgers she'd been working through since week 1, been quietly moving money. Not a dramatic amount each time. $50 here, $100 there. Small enough to disappear in the normal noise of a large operations accounting. But across 11 years, it added up to something that was not small at all. She sat with the numbers for an hour, checking them 3 times, because she didn't want to be wrong. She wasn't wrong. She went to Rowan's study at midnight and knocked. He opened the door fully dressed, which told her he'd been working too or not sleeping, or both. She put the ledger on his desk without preamble and pointed. He bent over it. He was quiet for a full 2 minutes. Foster, he said, not a question. 11 years, she said. Your father's tenure and yours. He may have started it under your father and just kept going because nobody was looking closely enough. I trusted him completely, Rowan said. I know. I defended him to Cal last year. Cal had a feeling about something and I told him he was wrong. You couldn't have known without the kind of detail work I've been doing, she said. These records weren't kept to be found. He straightened up. His face was very controlled. How much? She told him the number. He said nothing. It's not enough to break the ranch, she said. But it's enough to matter. especially right now with everything else. If this comes out alongside the Mercer situation and the newspaper story, he said, it looks like the Hayes operation is riddled with corruption top to bottom. My father's sins, an inside thief stolen cattle. I know what it looks like, she said. It looks like everything is rotten, he said. His voice was steady, but underneath it there was something she could hear. Not anger, but something older and more personal. The sound of a man discovering that the thing he has been trying to protect was more damaged than he knew. Rowan. She waited until he looked at her. This is one more thing that needs to come into the light. Not because it's comfortable. Because the alternative is, it comes out on someone else's terms, the way the Mercer story did. I know. He closed the ledger. I'll speak to Cal in the morning, and then I'll contact the sheriff. Do you want me in that conversation? He looked at her steadily. Yes, he said. Yes, I do. She nodded. He didn't move immediately. He stood there with one hand on the closed ledger, and he looked at her with an expression she wasn't sure she had the right translation for, yet something complicated and tired, and underneath all of that, something warmer than she'd seen in his face before. When you walked across that street toward me in Red Hollow, he said, dropping fence staples, I thought I was making a practical decision. You were, she said. I thought I was choosing someone strong enough to help manage what I was dealing with. Also practical, she said. I didn't think... He stopped, looked away, looked back. I didn't account for this part. What part? The part where you become necessary, he said. In ways that have nothing to do with fences or ledgers. The room was very quiet. Elena held his gaze for a moment. Something moved through her that she wasn't ready to name. And wasn't going to name yet. Not here. Not tonight. Not in the middle of a crisis that still had several more stages to survive. Get some sleep, she said. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. Elena. We'll get through this first, she said, firmly but not unkindly. All of it, and then we'll talk about the other thing. He looked at her for one more beat. Agreed, he said. She left him there and went back down the hall to her own room and sat on the edge of the bed and pressed both hands flat on her knees and breathed. She was not a woman given to panic. She was not a woman given to fantasy. She had spent 24 years building a practical relationship with reality, because reality was the only thing that had ever actually shown up for her. But something was shifting underneath her life, underneath everything she'd thought she understood about what her life was going to be, and she could feel it the way you feel the ground shift before you can name an earthquake. She wasn't afraid of it. She was just aware of it. Intensely, irreversibly aware. Mercer's answer came on the third day as promised. His brother came with him, a quieter, broader man named Thomas, who said almost nothing and watched everything with careful eyes. They sat in Rowan's front room, all four of them, and Caleb Mercer put a counter-proposal on the table that was harder than Elena had hoped and more reasonable than she'd feared. He wanted the 80 acres returned. He wanted a formal public acknowledgement of the fraudulent transfer, not buried in legal documents, but stated plainly on record. He wanted a sum of money representing what his family's operation had lost in 20 years of working with inferior land. And he wanted that acknowledgement to include the names of the judges involved, even the dead ones. The dead ones, Rowan said carefully. Judge Harlan is the son of one of those men. I know, Mercer said. If his father's name goes on that record, Harlan has personal motivation to come after this ranch in every ruling that touches us for the rest of his career. Yes, Mercer said. He does. He paused. That's not my problem to manage, Hayes. I'm sorry, but it isn't. Silence. Elena looked at Rowan. He was sitting very still with the look she was learning to read, the look of a man who is doing rapid, comprehensive math on something that doesn't have clean numbers. Then she looked at Thomas Mercer, who had said nothing this entire meeting, and who was watching her with the same careful, assessing attention she'd felt from him since they'd walked in. Mr. Mercer, she said, addressing Thomas directly. He blinked, surprised she thought it being spoken to. What do you actually want? Thomas looked at his brother. Caleb made a small gesture. Go ahead. I want my kids to grow up without inheriting this fight, Thomas said. His voice was quiet and straightforward. I want to be able to work my land without spending half my energy on a grievance that was somebody else's sin. He paused. I want it to be over. So does Rowan, Elena said. The question is whether the way it ends leaves both families able to survive what comes next. She looked between the brothers. If Harlan becomes an active enemy of this ranch, the financial strain of fighting his rulings could force a collapse that means the Mercer settlement never gets fully paid. You win the battle and lose the restitution. Caleb Mercer frowned. You're asking us to protect Hayes from consequences. No, she said. I'm asking you to think about which consequences actually serve your family and which ones just make you feel like justice happened while the real outcome falls apart. She held his eyes. The judges can be named. The record can be clear. But there's a way to structure how it's disclosed that keeps Judge Harlan from making it personal. That protects the restitution. That protects Thomas's kids from inheriting a second round of this. Another silence. Thomas leaned toward his brother and said something very quietly. Caleb listened. His jaw moved. Something worked itself out in his face that had clearly been working for a very long time. You negotiate, he said to Elena finally. Yes, she said. For Hayes. With Hayes, she said. There's a difference. He looked at Rowan. Is there? Yes, Rowan said. And the way he said it, the particular, uncomplicated certainty of it, made something in Elena's chest pull tight in a way she didn't examine. Caleb Mercer sat back. I'll work with your structure, he said, on the disclosure, but the acknowledgement is public, and it is complete, and it happens within 60 days. He stood. So did Thomas. And Hayes if this goes sideways. If I find out in 6 months that this was a maneuver to buy time. It isn't, Rowan said. If it is? Mercer continued. I will not come to you first. I will go directly to every newspaper in the state. Understood, Rowan said. They shook hands, all 4 of them, and Caleb Mercer on his way out the door stopped and looked at Elena one more time. Your father, he said, really is an idiot. The worst kind, she agreed, the kind who doesn't know it. He left. The door closed. The room was very quiet. Cal, who had been standing in the back, let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for about 40 minutes. That's the most unlikely thing I've seen in 22 years on this property, he said. Elena sat back down in her chair and pressed her hands flat on her knees the way she'd been doing lately when something large moved through her and she needed to keep it from showing entirely. Rowan was looking at her. That negotiation, he said quietly. That was necessary, she said. That was more than necessary. She met his eyes. I told you, I'm not here to be decorative. He held her gaze for a moment that was a beat too long to be entirely professional. Then Cal coughed pointedly, and the moment broke. But Elena knew, and she was fairly certain Rowan knew that something had shifted in the room that the cough hadn't put back where it was. Something was building between them, not gently, not slowly. The way things build in a place where both people have spent their whole lives being too practical for anything that didn't serve a purpose suddenly, and with the terrifying momentum of something that has already been true for longer than either person was ready to admit. Outside, the Texas sun was dropping low. Somewhere on the property, Foster Webb was going about his evening unaware that Elena had found the 11 years of careful theft in his numbers. Somewhere in Houston, Gideon Cross was waiting for a payment that wasn't coming. And somewhere in all of it, in the middle of inherited corruption and stolen cattle and fraudulent deeds, and a man learning to be different from his father, something that had nothing to do with any of it was quietly, stubbornly refusing to wait any longer. Foster Webb did not go quietly. Elena had expected denial, the standard performance of a man caught, the insistence that the numbers were wrong, that there was an explanation, that someone else had access to those records. What she hadn't expected was anger. Real anger, the kind that comes from somewhere deeper than guilt. The kind that has been sitting in a person so long, it's become structural. Webb stood in Rowan's office with the ledger open in front of him, and he looked at Elena and said, "You had no right to go through those books." "The books belong to the ranch," Elena said. "You've been here 6 weeks," he said. 6 weeks, and you're dismantling everything." "I found what was already there," she said. "I didn't put it there." "You don't understand how this operation runs," he said. "You don't understand what I've done for this family. 11 years. I kept these books through everything, through Hayes Sr. dying, through the transition, through drought years, when there was barely enough to make payroll." "And through all of that," Rowan said very quietly from across the room, "you helped yourself." Webb's jaw tightened. "Small amounts," he said. "Amounts that don't." Rowan's voice didn't rise. It went the other direction, lower, flatter, with the particular weight of a man who has decided not to be cruel, but will not be moved. "Don't tell me the amounts were small. Don't tell me you deserved it. Don't tell me what you've done for this family, as though that cancels what you took from it." He paused. "I trusted you completely. 11 years. That's what makes the amounts large." Webb looked at him. Then he looked at Elena with an expression that was equal parts hatred and something almost like bewilderment, the look of a man trying to understand how a woman who'd been on the property 6 weeks had found in one night what 11 years of careful concealment had hidden. "You're going to the sheriff," Webb said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Rowan said. "When?" Webb nodded slowly. Something collapsed in his face, not remorse exactly, but the specific deflation of a man whose structure has fallen and who is only now beginning to understand what he's been holding up. "My wife," he said. "She doesn't know. She had nothing to do with—" "I know that," Rowan said. "Dorothy will make sure she's all right until you've resolved this." It was a harder kind of mercy than softness would have been, practical, clear, no strings. Webb's throat moved. He didn't say thank you. He just nodded again and left the room. The silence he left behind was thick. Cal, standing in the doorway, exhaled. "That's the second person I'd have sworn on my life was solid," he said. "Your father, and now Foster." "My father's judgment created the conditions," Rowan said. "Webb chose his own actions. Those aren't the same thing." He looked at Cal steadily. "Are there others you're uncertain about?" Cal was honest. Elena had noticed that about him, the way he didn't dress things up. "2 people I want to watch more closely," he said. "Nothing I can point to, just instinct." "Trust your instinct," Elena said, "and let me know what you find." Cal looked at her with the expression he'd been giving her more frequently over the past weeks. Something between respect and a kind of wonder he was too practical to ever say out loud. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and left. The weeks after Webb were the hardest in a different way than the weeks before him had been. The crisis with Mercer was moving toward resolution slowly, with the careful deliberateness of 2 families trying to dismantle 20 years of grievance without destroying the practical present in the process. The 80 acres was surveyed. A lawyer not connected to either family drafted the formal acknowledgement. Rowan reviewed it, made 2 changes, and signed it without drama. Mercer signed it 4 days later. When the document was filed, Rowan told Elena about it in 3 sentences, standing in the kitchen doorway while she was going through the week's supply receipts. She looked up at him. He looked at her. "It's done," he said. "Good," she said. He stayed in the doorway for a moment longer than the information required. "You should feel something about that," she said. "It was a significant thing." "I feel several things about it," he said. "Most of them are complicated." "That's allowed?" she said. He went back to what he was doing. She went back to the receipts. But something had changed in the house that morning. Some pressure that had been present for so long, it had become the background atmosphere of the place, lifted slightly, like the moment after a long storm, when the air is different and you realize only then how heavy it had been. Gideon Cross arrived in person 3 weeks after Rowan stopped the payments. Elena knew he was coming because Rowan told her, and she knew Rowan told her, because by this point, there was an unspoken agreement between them that they didn't leave each other walking into things alone. Cross was a Houston lawyer of the specific type that Houston produced in those years, polished in the way that conceals, rather than reveals, with the particular smoothness of a man who has spent decades knowing things about powerful people and understanding exactly what that knowledge is worth. He came into the front room and looked at Rowan and then at Elena and said, "I wasn't aware you'd married." "We haven't yet," Rowan said. "And yet she's here for this conversation," Cross said. "She is," Rowan said. Cross's eyes moved to Elena. "Miss Brooks," she said. He smiled the smile of a man who had learned to smile at things that didn't amuse him. "Miss Brooks, I wonder if you understand what's at stake in this conversation." "Mr. Cross," she said, "I found the payment records 4 weeks ago, and I've had plenty of time to understand exactly what's at stake. So please skip the part where you try to make me feel like I shouldn't be in the room." Cross looked at Rowan. "She's direct," he said. "She is," Rowan said. "It's one of the things I rely on her for." Cross set his briefcase on the table without being invited to sit. He didn't open it. "I've been retained by the Hayes family for 15 years, he said. "In that time, I have protected interests that would have been significantly damaging if they had come to public attention. The cessation of our arrangement doesn't simply end my services. It ends a protection." "We're aware," Rowan said. "The documents I hold are copies," Elena said. "The originals are in public record. You have leverage, Mr. Cross, but you don't have exclusivity. The Mercer acknowledgement has already been filed. The information you're threatening to release is already on its way to being public on our terms." She held his eyes. "What you actually have is the ability to accelerate a timeline or to step back from something that no longer has the power you think it does." Cross was silent for a moment. She could see him recalibrating. "You've been busy," he said. "The Mercer agreement changed the equation," she said. "You were holding information about crimes that the current owner of Hayes Ridge has publicly acknowledged and begun making restitution for. Releasing that information now doesn't destroy Rowan Hayes. It corroborates that he's doing the right thing." Another silence. "What about the judges?" Cross said. "The sitting members of the—" "There are no sitting members," she said. "I've done the research. The judges involved in the original fraud are dead or retired. Their sons and nephews are a different problem and a different conversation." Cross looked at her for a very long moment. "You've outmaneuvered me," he said. Not with anger. With something that was almost professional admiration. "The situation outmaneuvered you," she said. "We just moved with it." Cross picked up his briefcase. He looked at Rowan. "Your father would have paid me indefinitely," he said. "My father is why this situation existed," Rowan said. "I'm not interested in inheriting his methods along with his mistakes." Cross nodded slowly. He looked at Elena one more time, the look of a man who is updating a file in his head. Then he left. The front door closed behind him. Rowan sat down in the chair nearest him and put his elbows on his knees and his face briefly in his hands, just for a second, just long enough to be human about it, and then his hands came down, and he looked up at her. "Is it over?" he said. "That part is," she said. "What's the next part?" "The investors," she said. "3 of them have sent letters since the newspaper story. They're nervous. You need to meet with them." He nodded, stood up, straightened his jacket. She watched him do it, watched the way he pulled himself back into the shape that the situation required, the way he had been doing it for years, alone, with nobody standing close enough to see the moment before the straightening, when the weight of everything was visible. She had seen it every time for 6 weeks now. And every time, something in her pulled toward him in a way that was no longer possible to categorize as practical. The investor meeting happened on a Thursday that was also the worst day Elena had experienced since arriving at Hayes Ridge, and she had experienced some genuinely difficult days. There were 3 of them. Houston men, money men, the kind who wore their wealth with the casual authority of people who have never had to convince anyone of anything because their balance sheets do it for them. They arrived in the morning, and they were polite in the way that people are polite when they have already mostly decided something and are going through the courtesy of a conversation before announcing it. Their concern was simple and brutal. The newspaper story, the Mercer situation, the web theft, and the cessation of the cross arrangement had combined to create what one of them called an atmosphere of instability around the Hayes operation. "We've been patient," said the oldest of them. A man named Aldridge, who had known Rowan's father and had the particular proprietorial attitude of someone who felt that history gave him a claim. "We've been patient through the transition from your father's management. We've been patient through the drought years. But the accumulation of these events represents a risk profile we cannot continue to carry." "What are you asking for?" Rowan said. "Repayment," Aldridge said, "of the full principal of our investment within 90 days. The room went very quiet. Elena did the math instantly, and she knew from the way Rowan's face didn't change the careful, controlled stillness that was his version of the numbers hitting him that he was doing it too. 90 days. Full principal. 3 investors. It was not possible. Not while also honoring the Mercer restitution. Not while replacing equipment and rebuilding operations. Not while absorbing the financial gap that Webb's theft had left in 11 years of accounting. The math said bankruptcy. One of the other investors, younger, less certain of himself, watching Aldridge, the way younger men watch older ones when they're not entirely comfortable with what they've agreed to, shifted in his chair. Elena looked at him. "Mr. Pierce," she said, and he startled slightly at being named. "Is this what you want, or is this what you came to say?" Pierce blinked, looked at Aldridge, looked back at her. "I beg your pardon." "You've been shifting in that chair for 20 minutes, she said. "You haven't said anything. I'm asking if you agree with the position." Aldridge started to say something. Elena kept her eyes on Pierce. "The 90 days is—" Pierce started, and then caught himself, and then continued, because she was still looking at him, and something about the quality of her attention made it difficult to stop. "It's aggressive," he said, "given the overall circumstances. It would force a bankruptcy," Elena said, "which means your investment doesn't get repaid at all. It goes into a liquidation process, and you recover cents on the dollar." She looked at Aldridge. "You know that. You're not asking for repayment. You're asking for control. 90 days is a number designed to fail, so you can step in when it does." The room was very still. Aldridge's face didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. "The ranch has been in the Hayes family for 40 years, Rowan said. His voice was controlled, but Elena could hear underneath it the thing she could always hear now, the thing that had no name yet. "My father built it wrong. I am fixing it the right way. What you're looking at is not instability. It is the process of becoming stable for the first time." He paused. "I am asking for your patience for 1 more year, 12 months. The restitution to Mercer will be honored. The operation will be clean. The returns you've seen for 11 years do not disappear because we went through a difficult quarter." Aldridge looked at him steadily. "Your father made promises too," he said. "My father's promises were worth what his methods were worth," Rowan said. "I'm offering you something different. You can take 90 days and get cents on the dollar. Or you can give me 12 months and get what you came here to get." Silence. Pierce looked at the third investor, a quiet man named Garrett, who had said almost nothing all morning. Something passed between them. 6 months, Garrett said. His first words of the entire meeting. "We'll give you 6 months to demonstrate the trajectory. At the 3-month mark, we want a full financial review." Aldridge looked at him sharply. "It's a reasonable position," Garrett said calmly to Aldridge, "and it's the one I'm comfortable with." A beat. 2. Aldridge looked back at Rowan. Something worked itself out in his face, the calculation, the assessment, the final determination of which risk was actually smaller. 6 months, he said. 3-month review. if the numbers aren't moving in the right direction. They will be, Elena said. Aldridge looked at her. You're very certain for a woman who's been here. 7 weeks, she said. And I've spent 7 weeks inside every financial record this operation has. So yes, I am certain. She held his gaze without flinching. The ranch has good bones. It was managed badly and corruptly. It is now being managed honestly. Those two things produce different results. Give it 6 months and look at the numbers then. Aldridge was quiet for a long moment. 6 months, he said finally. And it was a concession, and everyone in the room knew it. They left at 2 in the afternoon, and by 2:15, Elena was sitting on the back porch steps, with her hands around a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and she was very still and not quite looking at anything. She heard Rowan come out. She heard him sit down beside her, not close enough to crowd her, but close enough that she was aware of him in the specific way she was always aware of him now. They sat like that for a while. Aldridge was going to take the ranch, Rowan said. Yes, she said. If you hadn't pushed Pierce. Pierce had a conscience he hadn't decided to use yet, she said. I just made it easier. Rowan was quiet for a moment. When I brought you here, he said, I told you I needed someone strong enough to stand in the middle of something falling apart and not run. I remember. I underestimated, he said, what that would actually look like. She looked at him. He was looking at the middle distance, and she could see the weight of the day on him. The weeks of it, months of it, all the things he'd been carrying alone for years before she arrived, and all the things they'd been carrying together since. Rowan, she said. He looked at her. You've been doing that for years, she said. All of this, alone. I thought that was what strength was, he said. Alone. No, she said quietly. Alone is just alone. It's not stronger. It's just lonelier. Something in his face broke open, not dramatically, not with any of the performance that pain sometimes puts on. It was smaller than that and more real. The specific private break of a person who has been holding something for a very long time and has finally, in a moment they didn't plan for, put it down. He reached over and took her hand. Not urgently, not dramatically. The way a person reaches for something they have decided they are allowed to want. She let him. They sat there as the afternoon moved around them, and neither of them said anything for a while, and neither of them needed to. Then he said very quietly, I thought I brought you here to save the ranch. She waited. But I think... He stopped, turned to look at her fully. Elena, I think you were really saving me. She looked at him for a long moment. At this man who had chosen her from a crowd of better options and had spent 7 weeks discovering that he'd chosen correctly for reasons that went so much further than he'd known when he chose. Maybe, she said. Maybe we're saving each other. He kissed her then, not out of obligation, not as a conclusion to a negotiation or a seal on a practical arrangement. He kissed her the way a man kisses a woman when he has stopped pretending that what he feels is something other than what it is. And Elena, who had spent 24 years being invisible, being useful, being the other one, being the one who held things up so other people could be chosen, kissed him back, because she was chosen, completely, without qualification. And for the first time in her entire life, she let herself believe she deserved it. Behind them, through the kitchen window, Dorothy watched for exactly 2 seconds, pressed her lips together hard to keep the smile from becoming undignified, and went back to what she was doing. Out in the yard, Cal Denton looked at the back porch, looked away, looked at the sky and said nothing to anyone. Some things didn't need commentary. Some things just needed to be. The 3-month financial review fell on a Tuesday in early spring, and Elena had been ready for it since the Monday 3 weeks before it. She knew the numbers cold, not because she'd memorized them the night before, but because she had lived inside them every day since she arrived. Every supplier contract renegotiated. Every operational cost cut that didn't cut into the welfare of the people doing the work. Every new partnership built on terms that were fair instead of just advantageous. She had the ledgers in her head, the way a musician has a piece of music not as data, but as something she understood in her bones. Aldridge arrived first, then Pierce, then Garrett, who shook her hand before he sat down, which was new and which she noted without comment. Rowan laid the documents on the table. Elena sat beside him and did not perform confidence she had to manufacture. She had the real kind, which is quieter and doesn't need an audience. Aldridge put on his reading glasses and went through the numbers without speaking for 11 minutes. Elena counted. Operating costs are down 14%, Aldridge said finally. 17 in the East Pasture Division specifically, Elena said. The supplier contract revision Cal implemented in January accounts for most of it. Revenue is stable despite the drought continuation. We diversified the cattle mix in February, she said. Hardy breeds for the dry section's premium stock on the creek-adjacent land we reclaimed in the Mercer agreement. Different markets, different margins. Aldridge looked up at her over his glasses. The Mercer agreement added productive land. Yes, she said. That was part of the calculation. You calculated that before the agreement was signed, he said. It wasn't quite a question. It made the agreement easier to commit to, she said. Doing the right thing is simpler when it also makes operational sense. I don't think those two things have to be in opposition. Aldridge looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man revising a file he thought was complete. Then he looked at Garrett. Something passed between them, a small, almost invisible acknowledgement. The trajectory is satisfactory, Aldridge said. He took off his glasses. I'll say plainly, I expected to come here and find reasons to accelerate the original timeline. I did not find them. I know, Elena said. He looked at her steadily. You're not surprised. No, she said. He almost smiled. No, I don't suppose you are. He stood and the other two stood with him, and he extended his hand to Rowan first and then to Elena. 6-month stands. We'll review again at the end of the term. They left. Cal, who had been waiting in the hallway with the patience of a man who understood that some moments needed to be witnessed from a slight distance, appeared in the doorway. Well, he said. 6 months confirmed, Rowan said. Cal nodded slowly. Good, he said. And then to Elena. You want to come look at the east pump replacement? I think we found a better solution than what I was planning. She was already standing up. Show me, she said. Behind her, she heard Rowan say something to himself too quiet to catch, and she didn't turn back for it. But she heard the tone of it. And the tone was something she'd never heard from him in the first weeks, something easy, something almost light. She kept walking and carried that sound with her like something worth keeping. They were married on a Saturday in May, when the land was as green as it got in that part of Texas, which wasn't very green, but was honest, and honesty was something both of them had decided to build everything on. It was a small ceremony. Elena had not wanted anything large, and Rowan had not pushed for it, and the result was something that fit them, the people who actually mattered, standing in a room that had seen hard times and was still standing. Dorothy cried. She tried not to and failed completely, and then gave up trying with a dignity that somehow made the crying seem intentional. Cal did not cry. He stood very straight and looked at the far wall and blinked more than usual. Thomas Mercer came. His brother Caleb did not, which was honest. They had reached a working peace, not a friendship, and nobody was pretending otherwise. Thomas shook Rowan's hand and then turned to Elena and said, "You're good for this county," which was the most any of them had expected from that direction, and more than enough. Gerald Brooks was not invited. Savannah was. She came alone, having driven 3 hours from the town she'd moved to after things at the family ranch had finally completely fallen apart, which they had 6 weeks after Elena left, in the way things that have been held up by one person fall apart when that person stops holding them. Gerald had sold what remained of the cattle to cover the Caldwell debt, and the property was leased to a neighbor, and Gerald was living with his sister in Amarillo, which was probably better for everyone, including Gerald. Savannah arrived looking different from the last time Elena had seen her, less practiced, less performed. Harder in some ways, more real in others. She hugged Elena in the kitchen before the ceremony, and Elena let her, and they stood like that for a moment longer than either of them had planned. "You look like yourself," Savannah said when she pulled back. "I feel like myself," Elena said. "Is that what this is?" Savannah looked around at the kitchen, at the house, at the life that was visible in every detail of it. "Feeling like yourself. That, and working harder than I've ever worked in my life," Elena said. Savannah laughed, a real one, surprised out of her. "That tracks," she said. Then more quietly, "I'm sorry. For things I should have said differently. For things I should have seen sooner." "You saw them when you could," Elena said. "That's generous." "It's accurate," Elena said. "We were both in the same house, Savannah. Neither of us got out of it without damage. You just wore yours differently." Her sister looked at her for a long moment with the specific expression of someone who is being offered something they're not entirely sure they deserve. Then she nodded once and squared her shoulders and said, "Okay, tell me where to stand." The 6-month review came and went with the same result as the 3-month review, numbers moving in the right direction. Aldridge progressively less adversarial. Pierce increasingly willing to speak his own mind in the room, Garrett quietly satisfied. By the end of the year, Hayes Ridge was not the operation it had been under Rowan's father. It was different in ways that took longer to see than a balance sheet showed. Former enemy ranchers now borrowed equipment from Hayes' hands and returned the favor. Families that had been ruined by old water rights theft were farming creek-adjacent land under fair lease agreements that Elena had drafted herself. The ranch school, a small thing 2 mornings a week, Elena's idea and Dorothy's execution, had 17 children in it, including 4 from the Mercer property. People noticed. The county noticed, and then the region, and eventually a journalist from the San Antonio paper came to do a story that was not about corruption and fraud, but about what happened after, about what rebuilding looked like when it was done with honesty instead of just with money. The journalist asked to speak with Rowan. Rowan answered questions for 40 minutes. Then the journalist asked to speak with Elena. She sat across from him and answered every question straight. "How did you know the negotiation with Mercer would work?" he asked. "I didn't," she said. "I knew it was the only approach that could work. That's different from knowing it would." "What's the difference?" "Certainty is a luxury," she said. "You work with what you know is right, and you accept that the outcome isn't guaranteed. If you wait for certainty before you do the right thing, you'll be waiting your whole life." He wrote that down. "People in Red Hollow," he said, trying to be diplomatic about it, "say you were overlooked. Before all this?" "Yes," she said. "Does that?" "No," she said before he finished the question. "It doesn't make me angry. Not anymore." She paused. "It took a lot of people not seeing me for me to get very good at seeing things myself. I don't know that I would have been useful here if I'd been looked at my whole life instead of looking." He stared at her. "You can write that down too," she said. The Texas Rodeo Festival came in August of the following year. It was the largest annual gathering in the county. Ranchers, families, workers, merchants, people who came from 3 hours away because it was the kind of event that marked the year. Hayes Ridge had always had a presence at it, going back to Rowan's father's time, and that presence had always been about dominance. The biggest booth, the most ribbons, the most visible demonstration that the Hayes operation was the most powerful thing in the county. This year was different. Elena had worked with Cal and 3 other ranch hands to organize a section of the festival grounds where the families who had been part of the rebuilding were represented: the Mercers, the lease farmers on the creek land, the families who'd been part of the new supply contracts. It was Rowan's idea originally, and she had shaped it into something real. She was standing near the edge of the grounds talking to Thomas Mercer's wife about the school schedule when Rowan found her. "They're ready for us," he said. "For you," she said. "For us," he said. And the way he said it, no debate in it, no room for her to relocate herself into the background, made her stop arguing. They walked out together to the main platform, where the festival organizer was waiting. And the crowd, several hundred people arranged in the particular loose way of people who are enjoying a day, and have gathered because something is happening, settled and quieted. Rowan Hayes stood at the front of that platform, and Elena stood beside him, and she was aware in a way she couldn't entirely account for of how different this was from every moment of her life before the afternoon in Red Hollow, when she'd looked up from a bucket handle and found a man looking at her like she was exactly the person he'd been trying to find. Rowan spoke about the year, about what the ranch had been and what it was becoming. He spoke plainly, without the performance of a man trying to manage how he was perceived, and the crowd listened the way people listen when they believe the person talking. And then he looked at Elena, standing beside him, and he said, "I want to tell you something about this woman that I should have said publicly a long time ago." The crowd went very still. "I chose her because I could see she was strong," he said. "I thought strength was what I needed. Someone who could handle what I was dealing with. Someone who wouldn't break." He paused. "I was right about all of that, but I was wrong about what it meant." He looked at her, not at the crowd, at her the way he'd been looking at her since the beginning, like she was the fixed point. "I thought I was bringing her somewhere she needed to be. I thought I was doing something for her." Another pause, and his voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that the whole crowd could hear, the thing that happens when a man tells the truth about something he's taken a long time to understand. "She saved this ranch. She saved the people on it. She built something here that I could not have built, that my father certainly never built. And she did it while nobody was looking, which is how she does everything completely, without needing the credit for it." He took her hand, in front of everyone. "Everyone thought I rescued her," he said. "The truth is, she rescued all of us." The crowd erupted. Elena stood very still for a moment. Not from shock. She was not a woman easily shocked. From something else. From the particular profound disorientation of a moment that is so different from everything that came before it that your body needs a second to catch up to what it means. She looked out at the crowd. She saw Thomas Mercer clapping. She saw Dorothy with her hand pressed flat to her sternum in the way she had when she was trying not to cry in public. She saw Cal, who was looking at the sky again, blinking at nothing. And she saw Savannah. Her sister was standing at the edge of the crowd with her hands clasped in front of her, and she was crying without trying to stop it. And she was looking at Elena with an expression that was so honest, it hurt a little to look back at the specific expression of someone watching the person they underestimated their whole life, standing exactly where they were always meant to stand. Elena held her sister's gaze for a moment. Savannah pressed her hands together and gave one small, deliberate nod. "I see you. I have always seen you, even when I didn't say so. I see you now." Elena nodded back. Then she turned to Rowan, and she said quietly, for him alone, "You're going to embarrass me in front of the whole county." "Good," he said. "I'm serious." "So am I," he said. And he was smiling fully, without the habitual control that usually limited it. And the smile was the one she'd been catching glimpses of since that first night over coffee. The one that belonged to the version of him that existed underneath the weight of everything he'd been carrying. The version she'd spent a year, carefully, deliberately, without making a performance of it, helping him become. She squeezed his hand once, hard. He squeezed back. Later that evening, after the festival had wound down and the crowds had gone and the grounds were quiet, Elena sat on the platform with her boots off and her feet on the edge, and a cup of coffee that was actually warm for once, and Rowan sat beside her, and neither of them needed to fill the quiet. After a while he said, "What are you thinking about?" "The North Pump," she said. He looked at her. "At this exact moment. It's been making a sound it shouldn't be making," she said. "Cal said it was fine, but I want to look at it tomorrow before it becomes next month's emergency." Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I love you." She looked at him. "I know we've been—" He paused. "I know I've been slow to say it plainly." "You've been saying it for a year," she said, "just not with those words." "I know." He held her eyes. "I wanted to say it with the words," She looked at him for a long moment, at this man who had chosen her from a crowd when nobody else had ever looked, who had taken the worst of what he'd inherited and decided to make it into something worth leaving behind. Who had learned over the course of one hard and necessary year that strength and love were not opposites, that a man could carry both without one destroying the other. "I love you too," she said, plainly, without decoration. He nodded like something had been confirmed that he'd been working on the proof of for a while. "Now," she said, standing up and picking up her boots, "I'm going to sleep because I'm getting up at 5 to look at that pump before it becomes your problem." "Our problem," he said. She looked back at him over her shoulder. "Our problem," she agreed. And just that small word, that single syllable that had never in 24 years of her life applied to anything she had or built or carried, was everything. She walked off the platform into the warm Texas evening, and behind her, she heard him stand and follow. And she did not look back this time either, but for an entirely different reason than the last time she hadn't looked back. The last time she hadn't looked back, she was leaving something that had taken everything from her. This time she was walking towards something that had given it all back. The forgotten daughter. The invisible sister. The other one. Elena Hayes stood on land that had been rebuilt with her hands and her honesty, and her refusal to be less than she was, and she was none of those things anymore. She was a woman who had been seen completely loved without condition and chosen not despite who she was, but because of every single part of it. And that was not a thing the world had given her. That was a thing she had walked into the fire to find and carried home herself, and built with her own 2 hands into something that would outlast all of them, every enemy, every drought, every inherited sin, every person who had ever looked past her and seen nothing worth stopping for. She had been worth stopping for all along. She had always been worth stopping for. And now the whole county knew it, the land knew it. Her children would grow up knowing it without ever having to learn it the hard way, because she had paid that price already completely, so they would never have to. That was what strength really looked like. Not surviving alone, but building something from honesty, from love, from the wreckage of everything that came before, so solid and so true that it could carry the people who came after you all the way home. Elena Hayes had done exactly that, and she was only just beginning.